a quarterback who would very much love to be the focal point of the 2 weeks between Conference Championship Sunday and the Super Bowl, Deshaun Watson. He has requested a trade. Now, my understanding is the official magic words were uttered Monday, Tuesday of last week. The Texans have known for a while that this isn't working and he would like to go somewhere else. He was reluctant to flat out say trade me because that represents a bridge that is crossed that he doesn't want to walk back across. Peter, just a strange situation, and it keeps getting stranger for the Texans. And on top of everything else, they hired a coach that I would say, let me just throw a dart and say 87% of ardent football fans would say, who the hell is David Culley?
Mike, I've covered the NFL for all of David Culley's 27 years in it. And I know who he is, and I believe I met him a couple of times early on and talked to him. I know, and I don't mean that to slight him or to say that I'm not doing my job. I don't mean that at all. I just mean that he's an assistant coach in the NFL. I have never one time, until I think it was Monday or Tuesday of this week, ever in my life heard of David Culley being considered for a head coaching job. I just never heard anybody say, and especially in these, kind of racially aware times and culturally aware times, obviously David Culley is African American, and you basically want to you would want, if you were looking at the list of prominent guys in the black community who are good candidates for the NFL. And I'm not saying he wasn't on any list. I haven't really followed all the lists, but he certainly wasn't in the Eric Bieniemy, Todd Bowles, Jim Caldwell, Leslie Frazier vein. And again, I am not saying here that the Houston Texans made a bad hire. I'm saying here that the Houston Texans made a shocking hire. And we'll see how the hire turns out.
Yeah, I mean, there have been shocking hires in the past that have worked out, but the reality is David Culley wasn't on anyone else's list at all, never been a coordinator, a career position coach, had a couple of years with the Buffalo Bills as quarterbacks coach, 2017, the year they got back to the playoffs for the first time in a generation, 2018, the first year with Josh Allen, before reverting to the receiver coach role and assistant head coach, a role that he had with Andy Reid in Kansas City and with John Harbaugh currently, well, for now, for not much longer, in Baltimore. And 18 years with Andy Reid, I think, has significance. I think that the fact that Andy Reid trusted him for that long, and he's been and had been with Reid for that long, you're just going to pick up plenty of football information by osmosis being around Andy Reid for 18 years, Peter.
I mean, no doubt about it. And I have no idea if that was a major factor, if the interview was a major factor. These are things that we look forward to hearing from Cal McNair and Nick Caserio about what the major factors were in this, as I say, shocking hire. I think the one other thing to consider right here is that, they have to know that this is going to be, or has the potential to be, the rockiest year in the history of this franchise. If they do trade Deshaun Watson, there are going to be, I believe, hey, if I were a Houston Texans season ticket holder, not only if they trade Deshaun Watson would I burn my tickets, but I would show up at the first game of the season with a picket sign and say, do not go in here and support this lousy organization that trades 25-year-old franchise quarterbacks, and they trade them because they can't get along with them. I mean, this whole story is, beyond the pale to me. It's absolutely unacceptable that 4 months after you've paid a guy a market contract for quarterbacks, 4 months after that, he says, I never want to step foot in this building again. I mean, there's something really wrong here. So my point is, David Culley is going to have to bear the brunt of that. And the thing you hear about him is what a gentleman, what a great guy he is, what a patient guy he is, all that stuff. He's going to have to deal with he's going to have to deal with a storm in and around his building and in and around his team if they trade Deshaun Watson. And then on the other hand, Mike, maybe, just maybe, I doubt it, but maybe he and Nick Caserio can sit in a room and try to convince, at least try to convince Deshaun Watson. It doesn't seem that this will be likely. Try to convince him that, we'd love you to stay and here's why you should. So we'll see what the future holds.
I don't think Deshaun Watson is going to participate in that conversation. That's the problem, because this isn't a guy who's impulsive. This isn't a guy who's temperamental. This isn't a guy who's just flying off the handle and will change his mind at some point in the future based upon who they sign in free agency or who they draft. This is a guy who took his time to get to the point where he said, please trade me. And once he crosses that point, that's it. He's done. And so the Texans have multiple options at their disposal, and this next move by them will be the most fascinating. And it's very simple. They can say yes, they can say no and mean it, or they can say no and not mean it as a way to generate maximum trade leverage, the old Rick Spielman, we have no intent to trade Percy Harvin routine, and just sit back and wait for offers to come from teams that Watson would be willing to play for, whether it's the Jets, the Dolphins, or someone else. And see, look, at some point, someone's going to offer so much that it's going to be very hard to say no. Because if you say no, then you still have to deal with the mess with Deshaun Watson, whether that means him staying away from the team and not showing up, or whether it means him showing up and behaving like Jalen Ramsey did in 2019 with the Jaguars, where it was this constant dark cloud over the team of, I want out, I want out, I want out. I don't think Watson's going to do that. I don't think he's wired to do that. I think in his mind, he's done and he's out, and let's be adults here. I'm not going to show up and act like anything but a mature, responsible adult. Now, from Ramsey's perspective, he decided he wanted out while he was already in. And so you can't hold out at that point. It gets complicated, but just trust me, you can't hold out at that point. For Watson, he's making the decision before he ever sets foot back in the organization. And it's easier for him to just say, I'm out, I'm done. I'm not going to show up and act like my hamstring hurts and not practice, or say that I've got a headache or a concussion and not play in a game. I'm just not showing up. And if you're going to come after me for money, then let's do. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. But I feel like that's what Watson's position is going to be. If they refuse to take whatever offers, Peter, they will inevitably get. They can say we don't want to trade him, and they're still going to get offers from teams to trade him.
The most interesting thing is the most interesting time with this, I believe, is going to be almost exactly 3 months from now, Mike. The draft basically is 3 months from last night. It's the last Thursday in April. And so we are going to see, obviously, a bunch of activity between now and then. But I would say that there's basically like a 3-month deadline. The deadline is 3 months down the road. And I think there will be a lot of activity. But I also think if you're the Texans, the last thing I would do right now if you're the Texans is to say, all right, we've reached this impasse. Let's trade him right away. Both for reasons you wouldn't get your best offer that way, and to see if the waters can be calmed. It looks as though they can't be calmed. But, if you are talking about trading potentially the best player, he and J.J. Watt, the best two players in the history of this franchise, I think you better be deliberate and exercise all due caution.
And Peter, this creates an interesting angle to it, because I agree with you. The Texans, from their perspective, should wait right up until the draft, because then when you do it, you get back draft picks you can use right now to help make your team better. But the problem is, by waiting 3 months, there may be some suitors for Deshaun Watson who have moved on to other quarterback options because of this potentially robust free agent and trade market. Once you get your quarterback situation figured out, you're out of the Deshaun Watson discussion. It actually helps a team like the Jets that would presumably only be trading draft assets for it to wait until late April. The Dolphins, for example, like, what do you do with Tua? Well, it's easier to figure out what you're going to do with Tua if you get Deshaun Watson on March 17. If you get Deshaun Watson the night before the draft starts, then you got to figure out what the hell are we doing with Tua. So assuming that you don't trade him right back to the Texans.
Tua's a part of the Tua would be a part of any deal with Miami, wouldn't he? Why
Unless
would
they
the
don't
Dolphins
want him.
keep
What
Tua?
if they don't want him? That's what I'm saying. What
well,
if the
then they're
Texans
not going to
don't
make a
want
trade
Tua?
with Miami. They wouldn't make a trade with Miami. It's the same thing with the Jets. Why not, if you make a trade with the Jets, you take the second pick in the draft and you take Sam Darnold and you take other picks. And if you do that, then you get Darnold and maybe you get either Justin Fields or whoever it is. But in my opinion, there are teams that you would get their quarterback back in addition to draft capital. And so I don't think there's any trade with Miami unless part of the trade is Tua Tagovailoa.
Well, Peter, I also think there's a possibility of a 3-team trade. We may have talked about this before. The idea that maybe there's another team out there that wants Tua, so whatever they give up to get Tua flows through the Dolphins and then over to the Texans, because it may be the Texans maybe they want to start over with a rookie. Maybe they have someone else in mind that they want to bring to town. Maybe they'd love to have Derek Carr, of all guys, because he's David's brother and they want to get back to their franchise roots. But it could be that you don't want that guy that the team that wants Watson is willing to send you, so you find some way to make it happen. And I think it's going to get potentially convoluted and potentially complicated if it's something the Texans want to do, which also means that you do need to take some time to plan it out the right way if you are Nick Caserio. But, yeah, Nick Caserio, I don't know that he bargained for this when he took the job, although he knew or should have known that Deshaun Watson wasn't happy. And for David Culley, I mean, he's 65. He's never been mentioned as a potential NFL head coach. It's no matter how dysfunctional it is, it's still an NFL head coaching job, and that window is otherwise not going to open for David Culley. He's got to jump through it and be happy about it, and any problem that he has is a good problem because he's facing the problems inherent to being an NFL head coach, which means he is an NFL head coach.
What you said about Nick Caserio there is absolutely right. Nick Caserio, I believe, I'm sure he has done this or will do this. He's got to make a list in order of the X number of quarterbacks, let's say 8 quarterbacks in the NFL who are available, okay, or who might be available. And we're talking about Sam Darnold, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, and you make this list and you go all the way down to, let's say, Jacoby Brissett or whatever, and you have to make a decision. There's Mitchell Trubisky. And, who knows? Somebody's going to sign Mitchell Trubisky and give him a chance. I'd be shocked if he goes back to the Bears. But I really think that what you're going to see here is a very Belichickian approach, a very clinical approach to this by Nick Caserio and by the Texans, in which they would say, okay, we've got the Titanic on our hands. We've got this sinking ship, and somehow, we've got to keep bailing, put the lifeboats out, and figure out how we're going to go forward in 2021 without our franchise quarterback. And so you make your list, and you call the Lions, and if you love Matthew Stafford, and you say, hey, what can we do potentially, revolving around Matthew Stafford? And it could be a 3-way deal, Mike. You're absolutely right. You could be trading Watson somewhere else and then using part of the draft capital to go get, Matthew Stafford. That's why this is going to be a mayhem-like story, especially for the next, say, 6 to 7 weeks before the start of free agency. Coupled with the fact that I'm told that it's very likely the NFL is going to have similar rules in free agency this year, where visits are either severely restricted or totally cut off, because the pandemic is still here. So, you're going to be committing to a quarterback after talking to him on Zoom, and it's, so there's a lot of things that teams have gotten used to. And I think recruiting your quarterback for the next 10 years might be one of them this year.
I had a moment when you were talking about Caserio and how he will engage in a Belichickian type analysis that I thought of the story of Thomas Dimitrov 10 years ago calling Belichick regarding his advice on a potential trade up to get Julio Jones, and Belichick said, don't do it. Yeah. And I could imagine Caserio making a call to Belichick about a potential plot for a Deshaun Watson trade. And have you seen the gif of where Belichick takes the phone and slams it against that's bad. Yeah. If Caserio calls now with that request, Belichick is going to hang up and or throw the phone into the bench area at the sideline. One thing that I want to point out to folks, because I've noticed on social media and people have just kind of suggested that it's a given that Deshaun Watson's camp leaked that he's asked for a trade in the immediate aftermath of this David Culley news to rain on the parade and just kind of throw a wrench into what should be a good day and a positive day for the Texans. Here's what happened. What happened is word gets out that David Culley is getting the job. So then reporters start circling back to Watson's camp to say, hey, does this make a difference? They were together at the Pro Bowl. Aaron Wilson of the Houston Chronicle reported they made a good connection, Culley and Deshaun Watson, last year when the Ravens coaching staff was there. Does this matter? And through that due diligence, that's where it became known that Watson had already requested a trade, so it doesn't matter. So I don't think this was diabolical or sinister or in any way malevolent by Deshaun Watson's camp to give the Texans a rough time. The Texans should have known through the application of foresight, as you flick that David Culley domino, you're eventually going to dredge up the news that that no one else had known, that Deshaun Watson had officially said, trade me.
41 years in this business, Mike, and I've gotten used to people on the outside jumping to conclusions after I've reported something or it came from here. And maybe sometimes it did. But, people on the outside who jump to conclusions don't know for sure where it came from. And in my opinion, if they want to speculate and have fun on Twitter, that's fine. But reporting it as fact is another thing. And most often I have found that what is reported in those cases is crapola.
But these were people on the inside on Twitter, not on the inside per se, but in the business, who were just assuming that this was Deshaun Watson and his representatives deciding to,
you know what they say about the word
a more
assume,
graphic
Mike.
Phrase, just rain on the parade. Oh, I know what they say about it. I know very well. I have been there and done that many times. Okay, back to Culley, though, because I think he deserves his moment, because this is a culmination of a long career in the NFL. And Peter, when Sims and I were trying to digest all this yesterday, it occurred to me that maybe he's never been a candidate to be a head coach because he's not one of these guys that is constantly working all the angles and using his agent to plant his name and calling up guys like us saying, hey, have you ever thought about David Culley as a potential head coaching candidate? Look at what he's accomplished over the course of his career. Look at how he gets along with players. I think that Culley may just be one of these guys who's kept his head low and his mouth shut, and he just does his job. And in an industry where there are plenty of people who are constantly looking to find a way to position themselves and promote themselves to be head coaches, you're at a disadvantage if you don't behave that way.
Mike, I'll make this point about that theory, okay? And most of the time, like, for instance, let's take Arthur Smith. Okay, I think Arthur Smith is one heck of a candidate, say in the last 12 months, because I watched the Tennessee Titans play football. I watched the quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, who had a guru in Miami, in Adam Gase for a while, but the guru never, obviously Tannehill was hurt a lot, but he never had him play half as well as he's played in Tennessee. So then you say, that's one in Arthur Smith's column. Here's the other one in Arthur Smith's column. Watch some of his play calls and watch how, he basically pounds you with Derrick Henry. And then all of a sudden you get to the 1-yard line. Everybody converges on Derrick Henry. And Ryan Tannehill takes a shotgun snap and just prances into the end zone untouched. He's an intelligent guy who does smart things in games and smart things with his players, and with players who are, the Khalif Raymonds of the world, who went to Holy Cross or wherever, and he makes players out of them. And I'm not saying he makes players, but I mean, he coaches them up, he puts them in position. And all I'm saying, Mike, is that I really think, yes, can agents get coaches in front of teams? Yes. Can agents get coaches jobs? Technically, I guess so. If you say, well, he got him in front of a team. Look, I don't even know who Brandon Staley's agent is. I don't know. But Brandon Staley got the job with the Chargers because in 2 interviews, they raced to get him signed so he wouldn't go take an interview with the Eagles. And look, I can tell you, the Rams absolutely unequivocally, they were trying to hide Brandon Staley this year. But his team performed so great. He takes over for Wade Phillips, a coaching legend. He's got the #1 defense in football. Jalen Ramsey is like worshiping at his altar, this 37-year-old coordinator, now 38. All I'm saying is, in my opinion, most guys they might be able to get help by their agents. They're not getting jobs because of their agents.
Well, and Culley wasn't in a position to showcase himself at all, which makes the move, to use the word that you utilized earlier in the segment, shocking that he ends up becoming the head coach of the team. And there is a theory rocketing around out there that Culley is going to have the job for a few years and then Josh McCown will elevate to the head coaching job. Now, the fact that Pep Hamilton's going to be the quarterback's coach and not McCown throws a wrench into that theory. But there is a belief that McCown is going to some way, somehow be part of this coaching staff when the dust settles, unless the brouhaha from last week when he got a head coaching interview has caused the organization to say, let's just wait a little while on bringing Josh McCown into the fold officially. Maybe we'll sign him again next year to actually be a player. So, Peter, the dust settles, or at least begins to settle on this year's quarterback carousel. 2 minority hires, Robert Saleh and David Culley. Eric Bieniemy shut out again, and you and I have talked about in the past, and I don't know what more there is to say. Eric Bieniemy should be an NFL head coach. And I'm still working on this theory that the billionaires don't like to be told what to do by anyone. So the more that people like us and fans and others in the media are saying, hire Eric Bieniemy, maybe some of them are just saying, no, we'll do what we want. Don't you tell us what to do. That's the only thing I can think of at this point.
I think, let's talk about Houston for a minute. Nick Caserio has been in this role with Bill Belichick for, I think, 12 years. Or some, at least a decade. He took over the sort of, the chief assistant to Belichick in personnel after Scott Pioli went to Kansas City. And so he's been there a long time, and he has been thinking for a long time, okay, who am I going to hire as a coach? Who's my short list as a coach? And again, I have no idea how he ended up with David Culley, but he's thinking about that. And I can tell you that Nick Caserio, I'm sure, is mindful of what is going on in the outside world, but he is not going to let Troy Vincent or anybody tell him who to hire for a head coach. And I'm not saying that Troy Vincent called him and said, hire this guy, because I don't think he did. But all I'm saying is he's not going to be told who to hire for a head coach. This is his shot. And for whatever reason, which I hope we'll find out soon, he picked David Culley, and we'll see why. But that is one of the fallacies in this, in my opinion. Cal McNair is saying, whoa. Come to me when you get the guy who you want, and we'll talk about it. But Cal McNair is not out there, mining or, going out looking for all of the candidates. That's why he's got Nick Caserio there.
Well, and the one name that we have yet to mention 31 minutes into the program, Jack Easterby. I think that the Culley hire is all part of his broad master 10, 15, 20-year plan to basically be the surrogate owner of the Texans without the owner realizing that he's usurped control, because there are people who believe Culley is just a short-term bridge to the guy that Easterby would have hired right now if he could in Josh McCown. So we'll see how that plays out.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.